Hi there, everybody out on the internet. My name is Jason Salas, and thank you so much for joining. We are in a very, very special hangout on air this evening or today, depending on what time you're in the world you are watching us. I am joined by some very good friends of mine, and we are going to talk about Glass for Gaming, a think for glass approach. Now, we're talking about gaming in the scope of wearables, so you can even include, Android Wear or other type of smartwatch frameworks in this discussion. But I got some really good friends of mine that I'd like to introduce you to, and we got a really good panel. Of course, my very good friend Alan Furstenberg from New York. He was the gentleman with whom I co-authored the book, which is available right now from O'Reilly, Designing and Developing for Google Glass, and a very, very experienced gamer. Alan, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, Jason, great to be here.
All right, and Alan and I have been talking about, putting this thing together for a while now because we wanted to talk about how to use glass in the scope of gaming, not necessarily video games, but actually using glass where the human person is the controller. We're going to get to that. But also joining us on the panel tonight, somebody who, if you mention the word glass or you Google glass, you probably only go like 3 or 4 links down until you find Mr. Noble Ackerson, because he is all over the place and doing amazing things for our community. So Noble is in the Washington, D.C. area. He is the brains behind LinksFit, which everybody uses, or if you don't, then everybody should. And his input tonight is going to be very, very key, because although LinksFit isn't a game application for glass per se, it actually applies a lot of gamification, and I think that's very, very key when we talk about glass for gaming. So Noble, thanks a lot. And what's going on, man?
Thank you for having me. Honored to be here. I'm very flattered by the intro.
Well, very well deserved, certainly. And then also joining us is Stephen Maltone, who is someone who has a lot of experience in glass gaming, because he was part of the very creative team that during last year's Breaking Glass Hackathon in San Francisco was able to put together the first prize winning entry, Glass Frogger, which you haven't checked it out, you probably should, because the architecture of it is a really neat solution to getting around the glass gaming problem, if you will. So, Steve, what's going on, man?
Hi, nice to see you, and thank you for inviting me today. It's awesome to be on this hangout.
All right, so real quickly, let's go through the line just so we can know in terms of, like our age and our experience with gaming and everything. What type of savvy, I guess we can start out with, do you have with gaming in general? Not necessarily on wearables or on glass, but like how have each of you approached gaming throughout your lives? And we'll start with Al.
It's kind of funny because a lot of what I see as gaming makes it a very social aspect to me. So I think of games primarily in terms of board games and card games first, and only then seeing how they work with video games. And while I love video games, I'm a diehard Zork fan and the old going back to the old text adventures, right up to modern stuff. I think of them as very social creatures.
That's
how about you,
cool.
Noble?
Yeah, I sort of look at games also from a social outside standpoint, especially growing up. My family, we couldn't afford console like the NES originally, so my gaming consisted of cops and robbers. I was actually playing out with friends outside, with in society. But evolving now, I sort of in high school got an NES, and a little late, about a decade later than normal people. A lot of role-playing games, a lot of strategic games like Command and Conquer. I don't know whether you guys remember those.
Very cool.
RTSs. StarCraft comes to mind. I was an avid and I still am an avid StarCraft, Brood War especially, player. And of course, Halo, first-person shooters came around. So my first FPS that I think I really enjoyed was Duke Nukem, maybe Wolfenstein. I don't know. I can't remember.
Nice.
But yeah,
okay, so
the gamut, basically.
Very, very cool. Okay, so Steve, when you guys were putting Glass Frogger together, obviously that's kind of that's a throwback to the 8-bit games of of yesteryear, way back. Does your own gaming experience extend that far back?
Actually, it does. Noble makes me feel a little bit maybe embarrassed, but my family was able to get me a NES like when it first came out. So I remember I had a NES. We had an Atari before that. I've been really into gaming. That's probably where I got really started with computers, I would say. I and maybe with wearables as well. I had the Power Glove. I was one of the first people to put the Power Glove on and be like, wow, it's nothing like it looks in the movie Wizard. You know, they totally made it seem like it was going to be this amazing thing, and really you were using a controller on your forearm rather than actually using gestures, so it was a little bit misleading. But yeah, you know, Noble brought up a great point. Gaming, probably the earliest game I can remember playing is with my friends outside. We were playing Manhunt in the neighborhood, you know, playing football in the field behind our elementary school, stuff like those were the real games that I got started with. And then, of course, when video games came out, you know, football was a popular. Super Tecmo Bowl was like my most favorite video game ever. It was kind of mimicking real life. I loved to play it in recess, and then I loved to play it once the Nintendo came out. So, yes, I've been gaming since the beginning. I mean, I still love Pac-Man. I just downloaded the Pac-Man app on my Android. It's interesting to see how that's evolved from now a joystick to a touch interface. And you know, it's still the same game, but it's evolving. And that's really cool.
Very nice. Okay, well, my own experience in gaming is like I started maybe playing the computer games of like way back when my dad got me started on an Apple IIe, maybe in '85, '86. Then I graduated to, you know, like if my grades were decent enough, I got an Atari 2600, and then I started playing NES, and then that became Game Boy, and then eventually after college I, you know, took a few years off, and then, you know, went for Super NES, and then got PlayStation and PSP and everything. So I've actually kind of grown up with games. The modern stuff kind of escapes me, and it's kind of over my head because like I kind of stopped playing and, you know, quote unquote grew up when games really went for high def graphics and rich, you know, stereo sound and things like that. But I think it's interesting how my own interest in building gaming experiences, especially for the wearable market, kind of harkens back again to, you know, the 8-bit titles and the side scrollers and things that, you know, didn't have to blow you away in terms of visuals and atmospherics and things like that. So it's a really good group, and I think we're going to have a good lively discussion here tonight about you know, really covering all bases, because it seems like we, you know, kind of go all over the place, and we got a bunch of people watching right now. So if you do have a comment, please.
Another one to mention, Alan mentioned text adventure games. I remember playing text adventures on my calculator in high school. It was like a TI-82, and we were passing around these text adventure games and stuff like that. And it's like, you know, gaming has gotten itself onto all types of devices. It's everywhere, you know.
Very cool. Well, I remember the old Nintendo Game & Watches too, which were like kind of the first portable gaming system where if you push the LCD screen down, you could see every single animation frame. So we have come quite a long way, no doubt. Okay, so Alan, let's throw it over to you now because you know, we've had our agenda doc up for several weeks now, and we've solicited input from the community, and we got some absolutely fantastic comments. So thank you so much, everyone, for your input. We incorporated those into our discussion tonight, and let's kind of talk about, gentlemen, categories of games and like genres and everything, and what might naturally work for glass and what might be somewhat of a stretch, and therefore you probably don't want to do it on glass because to force fit it into the glass paradigm might actually be dishonest and everything. So Alan, why don't you lead us off? I think you're unmuted, Alan.
So I am. One of the things I hope our viewers realize is that we're coming at this from a very design-oriented focus. So when we talk about designing something for glass, we're talking about what are the things that are a great fit, what are going to make great glassware, and what things are otherwise forced. We want to obviously try to help steer people towards the things that make for great glassware. We talk about it in our book, Google talks about it on their pages, and stay away from some of the things that we don't think are. So in looking at some of the categories, we were thinking about, you know, some classic games like, you know, point-of-view shooters. And on one hand, that seems like a really, really cool idea. And on the other hand, you're thinking, oh, wait a minute, does that mean you need to stare at your screen constantly and try to move your head and move it around, but you're staring at your screen. You're not focusing at the world around you. So we're kind of wondering, that to us sounds like it's not such a good idea. Similarly, you look at some of the side-scroller games. They're games that are designed, and this is one of the biggest problems that we see with games classically, is that games want to draw you into them. They want to grab your attention and keep your attention for as long as possible. That traditionally is the sign of a great game, but it's the sign of really bad glassware. And I think that's one of the conflicts that we see with point of views, side scrollers, RPGs, and sports games to some degree. They want to draw you in, they want to keep you there, and that's kind of a conflict. What do you guys think? Stephen.
Well, I mean, as you're bringing that up, I was thinking to myself, I'm relating it back to Glass Frogger. You have to stare at the screen. You have to watch the cars passing by and make sure you don't run into them. But then if you think about the mini games that Google has launched for Glass as well, you also have to stare at the screen. There's the sharpshooter game, and if you don't stare at it, you'll miss one of the skeets. So it's like you're just gonna basically, you have to stare at the screen for certain games, right? But when you bring up that point, it's interesting that two Google products that were very popular with developers launched at the same time. Google Glass, or similar times, right? Google Glass and Ingress, the amazing game that I'm obsessed with. And since Glass was launched, everyone wants Ingress on Glass. I think that's a great example where you don't have to stare at the screen. You can get notifications when you get nearby something based on your GPS location, and you just quickly can interact with it and walk on. So it's more what you're talking about, where you'll be in the world, you won't be in the game. And I think that's definitely a good point for Glass gaming.
And I think Ingress is a great example of something that we were calling a social or a casual game. Social, particularly when you want to deal with other people. Absolutely. What kind of games do you build that you deal with other people in the physical world where you are, and yet you've got this augmented aspect to it. Mm-hmm. Ingress is one example. And I want to make it clear that when I'm talking about social games, I don't mean what Facebook calls a social game. I look at Facebook games as antisocial games, because really their entire purpose is for you to pester your friends, not to do anything interesting with your friends. So I think that aspect is a crucial difference.
Mm-hmm. That would probably be why none of you responded to all my Farmville requests, I'm thinking.
Yeah, that would be why. You're lucky you didn't get dropped as a friend, because I know plenty of people who did.
They use social more as a marketing tactic, not as a piece of the game itself. They're starting to integrate it deeper and deeper into the game, but more for marketing purposes, distribution. Like in Candy Crush, you gotta bug your friends in order to get to the next level. That's not really social, and I understand what you're saying. It's not a social part of the game. It's just a social tool that the game is utilizing.
Exactly.
Well, let's go to Noble for this next point, because Noble, Alan mentioned, of course, crossing perhaps the social/casual continuum with Google's design principles, pushing so hard the concept of micro interactions when you write any type of glassware, whether it be with the Mirror API or the GDK. Does that mean that when we build gaming experiences, do they have to be casual games?
It doesn't have to be. Frankly, as part of the design and development guidelines that Google has given us, there are multiple experiences that a piece of glassware can have. I mean, an immersive experience where is not all bad, where you use your hands and gestures in order to get what you need, or sort of timely ingress-like, or what I guess the guys at Field Trip have done so well. I know that's not a game, but that's super interesting. I'd like to sort of add one anecdote. Like when I first met Alan, we were at a hackathon thrown by Google. It was the first hackathon ever had, and it was exclusive to a few people who were familiar with the Glass platform. Well, none of us were familiar with the Mirror API. And I'd met Alan, super recent, and we're all thinking about what we were going to build within 48 hours. And my idea to Alan, the The Thought Still Open was a social game in the true sense of the word social, where if you guys have ever played Werewolf or a game like that, we were basically going to have that experience on glass. At that point, even at that early point, with only the Mirror API, we understood that glass has certain features that is sort of custom tailored to the entire experience, like, you know, a GPS-based device that sort of can, you know, given a little bit of work, you can sort of do a lot with geofencing and having it notice that you're with other people or around a certain area, and so you certainly shouldn't shovelware, or basically sort of port a touch-based game, which is most of our cell phone games and our tablet-based games. Even our computer-based games are sort of click and touch heavy. We sort of have a new opportunity to sort of rethink how we interact with our world versus you know, the traditional sort of touch to see something happen kind of games.
And, you know, it's also worth mentioning, you know, because of the history of our community and of Glass developers, that the first prize winning entry at that particular hackathon when the Mirror API was released was Icebreaker, which was written by 3 developers. I know one gentleman was from Twilio, another one was from Hulu, and I forget where the other guy was from. Forgive my ignorance, but Icebreaker was essentially a social game that didn't involve any UI whatsoever. You had to like go around within a certain proximity, and if you met another person playing the game, you would have to take their picture, share it with them, and then they would confirm by saying, yeah, you know, this is me and this person shared it, and then you would essentially like level up. So that's a beautiful example and a pattern, if you want to emulate that, of like how to actually create a game, you know, without much of a UI whatsoever, but you know, a lot of human input and a lot of physical interaction to actually play it.
That was actually my first Glassware. I don't know about you guys, but when I picked up Glass, they had me go through my Glass app and everything, and Icebreakers was already installed there, and I was able to add that to my Glass right away. They kind of used that at the base camp to kind of be a social thing for us to meet each other. The explorers could walk around and play the game in base camp right there, and it was great. It's interesting, though, I never thought of that as a game until you just brought that up, but it absolutely is.
It is, and actually that whole concept is perfect because it sort of, you know, gives you the stark difference between an immersive game and just a casual game, right? So, you know, again, you have an opportunity as a developer to sort of build something without the constraints of a mouse or a touch input. Similar to that game that you guys are talking about is a mobile game that at the Big Android Barbecue last year, as part of the conference, the guys at Big Android Barbecue had a concept of meeting other people by infecting people or having sort of an antidote to people. And if you sort of, I forget how it worked, but with the mobile component, you would basically exchange information, and that person who exchanged information with you might have been infected. Now imagine that in a Glass kind of paradigm, right? Where being, you know, interacting with the, you know, not just people, but everyday objects could either give you, you know, vials of poison or, you know, potions or whatever in and around your entire world, and being able to sort of, you know, interact with not just people, but, you know, anything. You know, anything that is part of that universe that you create.
Now, Noble, you said something a couple of minutes ago that I want to bring up again. You talked about how you could have an interactive game such as this, and that's part of this new paradigm that we're using with Glass. And one of the things I want to point out is that even though the game is interactive, it doesn't, the game is immersive.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean that the Glass display is constantly on.
Right.
And you know, that's one thing that a lot of people forget, especially when they start talking about, you know, when they start looking at the coding level. They see these immersive apps, and they think, okay, that means my display is going to be constantly on, and I'm constantly going to be doing something with it. I think they forget that that's not what it means. It just means that the app is constantly running. and that it may be reminding you of something. It may need to call your attention to something at any given moment. You may be constantly playing the game, but you're not constantly interacting with glass. And one of the other things that that Jason and I kind of brainstormed as we were looking at this is he brought up the issue of a sports game, and we said, that's a bad idea. It doesn't work well for games. But then we thought, if you rethink it, and this is where I'm going to start transitioning to the next section of our of the show, if you rethink what that means and how that works, if you now take a sports game and turn it into a fitness game, or you take your fitness activities and turn them into games, or you gamify them, you'll have an immersive app that is in many ways like a classic sports game, but it's completely different. And Links Fit, I think, is a great example of that. You want to talk about that very briefly?
Sure, very briefly. So the whole idea of Links Fit was to help motivate people, at least people who traditionally wouldn't want to sort of get up and go do something, to help motivate them to make fitness a habit, right? And what's the best way to do that, right? We approach that obviously by rewarding someone, in a traditional social manner, being able to share your stats to a social network of your choice, depending on whether that social network is on Google Glass or not, right? But there were three things that we decided we wanted to ace in order to master the habit loop problem when it comes to fitness, and that sort of we think works, and that's what we're focused on: the subscription, the scheduling, and the entire experience of working out and then sharing that your final workout, right? The whole subscription was being able to sort of choose, having a concept of an app store, Netflix marketplace just for fitness. I'm into yoga and I just want yoga workouts. And then being able to contextually be reminded that you are onto something or you're towards your goal. Let's say you traditionally always take a walk at a certain location. Well, you're walking without the app running. We should be able to use your location to help remind you that, trigger the app and see how far your distance is this time when you walk or you run, or you just arrived in New York and your coach is not here, but there's a bar studio, whatever you're into, right next door, so you can definitely go there. So that's what we're focused on.
Now, one of the things that we thought was kind of brilliant and unique about it is that we saw Links Fit kind of as a modern day Wii Fit, and that was, one of the things that really made the Wii stand out as a device was that people were using it as a fitness application where people didn't expect that in the past. So that kind of came across as different and unusual, and it was an opportunity for the Wii to get itself in people's homes. And that's what I think we want to start looking at a little bit in this section, which we call challenges and opportunities for games on glass.
Perfect.
And there are a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities. And Jason, you want to talk about this some more?
Yeah, and as a sports enthusiast, I like Steve and like Noble, and I know Alan because Alan has at least attempted to play golf at like one point in his life.
Alan gave up on golf within 30 seconds of trying.
It is a frustrating game.
So Tiger Woods is certainly not threatened, I guess, by Mr. Furstenberg. But as someone who has actually played sports in real life and then has been a big fan of sports games translated to digital screens and things like that, it's kind of hard because, of course, the big precept of athletic games is emulating the real world, and how well do you handle physics, and a lot of the times it is predicated on how good are your graphics, but there is something to say about, can you actually create a game that works on glass, either with the Mirror API or the GDK, and it is actually fun, and it's interesting to play. And one thing we talked about offline a couple weeks ago was, can you actually take like what the Madden franchise calls it's like coach mode, and instead of actually having to play a football game based on gesture and touch and all the control input mechanisms through glass, can you just say, okay, well, I'm just going to pick a offensive play, and I might be challenging somebody like Steve, who on the other side, like you said, because he's a big fan of Super Tecmo Bowl, and he's going to pick a defensive formation, and based on those plays, how will we play out against each other? And a computer will just actually generate, okay, well, Jason just rushed for 3 yards, but he was stopped.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so essentially you're playing in coach mode, and you're not actually physically playing the game. You're just picking plays and letting some AI agent, like work out exactly how it goes. I mean, you take some of the gameplay out of it, but you can still actually have a pretty cool experience, and you can do that when you're in line at the bank.
I think one of the things to realize is that you're taking away certain gameplay elements, but you're adding in different ones. So you're changing it from an action game, from a game that you're deep in the middle of, to more of a strategy game, more of a game where you need to think out and look at the bigger picture, and you're controlling the bigger picture. And it turns it into a turn-based game where there wasn't a turn-based game before.
Exactly.
And frankly, if you want to take that a step further, for any aspiring developers that want to take this idea and run with, definitely give Jason some credit. But it's a brilliant idea. Having the ability to even extend this across platforms is doable. So if you took off your glass device and hopped on your computer, you should be able to continue that. And obviously avoiding shovelware in the process. I will do a disservice to this conversation if we don't make it clear that no platform is perfect for all types of games. Each has its weaknesses and strengths, for that matter, right? Mm-hmm. So in the experience that you were talking about with the Wii Fit, if you have ever used a Wii Fit, you can always sort of fake a movement by just sort of waving your hand and stuff like that. And obviously that's not sort of the perfect experience. But back to the football idea. It's a brilliant idea. I think. I can't believe no one has thought of that yet. I think you're on your way to making millions there, Jason.
Well, I believe the coach mode thing is probably the intellectual property of Electronic Arts. So
right.
Pending input from the lawyers and everything, we'll just go ahead and agree it's a good idea.
But let's take that idea and realize that it opens up a pretty wide range of games that, on some fundamental level, are turn-based and are person controls it. So if you think of what a civilization of a Civilization, Sid Meier's Civilization. Yep. It actually harkens back to a game called Hammurabi, which was a text-based game back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Fundamentally, they're the same game. Civilization souped it up with a lot of really cool graphics and a lot of really complex controls, but fundamentally, it's the same turn-based, you are God controlling the world game. And that's a game that, on some level, could fit in really nicely with Glass. And to continue with Noble's thought about using the right platform for the right thing, it's also one that might work well as a multi-screen. And that's when I think of one of the great opportunities that we have with Glass, is to be able to say, you'll be able to do some things great on Glass and some other things great on your tablet and some other things great on your desktop, put them all together.
Right. Okay, I want to kind of jump in. I'm sorry. I'll go to Steve next, but I want to kind of backpedal to what we were talking about. Alan said the Facebook titles, and let's kind of wrap them all up under and say like the Zynga franchises, right? Like your farm bills and things like that. I played those and I thought they were pretty cool experiences. Could you possibly build an extension of those games for Glass, where you can say you're not exactly playing Farmville, where you do every single type of interaction and that rich engagement on Glass, but say when you're away at the store or like you're out for a walk, all of a sudden you see it's like, oh, you've got the elusive platinum turnip available to you right now. If you grab it within 5 minutes, you'll be able to use it. So without having to rush back to your computer and play the full HTML5 or Flash game or whatever UI they use right now, and get the full immersive experience, you can actually still engage with the game, and you can do basic, simple interactions on Glass that are, again, within the scope of a micro interaction, but you're not actually playing the full game, but you're still involved. What do you guys think the feasibility is of that?
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I was going to jump in, kind of bringing it back to the football thing. I mean, if you really think about it, fantasy football is also a game. I mean, it's basically based completely in statistics. And so I have some friends that are just obsessed with like sports statistics, and that's a game to them. They're playing it all the time. Yahoo Fantasy Sports is a huge, huge franchise. So it's like maybe on your glass, and you're playing like Madden on your Xbox. Maybe on your glass, you're just seeing stats, and you're seeing stats for all of the other games that are happening in the season that you're playing, like right now. Like in Super Tecmo Bowl, going all the way back to that. You'd play your game, and then you'd have to press like the button several times to let it go through all the other games of that week. You'd see them all play. So it's kind of like, let's watch all those happen in like fake real time while you're playing your game on your Nintendo. See all the other games for the week happen on your glass. Something like that. So multi-device gaming sounds amazing. Absolutely.
Exactly.
And as you know, I run a startup for the devices that we're talking about here, Google Glass and other wearable devices, right? So again, I'll be remiss if I don't mention to other businesses, just because you're a corporation, it doesn't mean you shouldn't sort of look at games as a way to sort of cross-promote your brand. It's not all bad. Some businesses need to start thinking, and I don't know whether I'm sort of putting the cart before the horse or jumping to another section of this conversation, but the thought just came to me that the Cosmopolitan in Vegas, for example, can build some innovative game-centric glassware that, using your location and your proximity to their casino, being able to sort of send you a notification if you have glass or on your watch, and say, hey, here are some free chips, virtual free chips, come in and cash them in. Or here's a free game of the slot machine thing. Spin it on your watch, spin it on glass, or talk to it on glass, and be able to sort of win an opportunity to get a free lunch and stuff like that. Businesses need to sort of start thinking outside the traditional apps, quote unquote, that they think they have to offer, and look at games on wearable devices, because it's a little bit more immersive and closer to the person normally when they're thinking about approaching to stuff. I don't know where that thought came.
It's really interesting, because when you bring that up, I used to work for Showtime Networks, the TV network here in the United States.
Right.
And that was the first iPhone app that we built, was actually a game. It was a simple puzzle. But the point was to connect with people on the iPhone, which was a very popular device. I mean, it still is, obviously, but it was just match a few photos from like some of the TV series that we have, match them together, and if you correctly match them, you'll get a wallpaper for your iPhone. Very basic, but it's more branding. It's a marketing game. So you're absolutely right. Like, corporations can definitely use gaming for marketing efforts, but just continually to connecting with their customers.
And Noble's efforts in that space have been very inspiring, because he took and they kind of bundled that whole gamification concept under the idea of Pi. And Noble, go ahead and explain what Pi is, because that's something very specific to your app, and people strive to achieve that.
That's trademarked and patent pending, folks. I'm just kidding. Actually, it is. Basically, Pi is, after you work out, as you're working out, we're listening to your movements and your motion, and we decided to ask ourselves, what are we doing with all this motion? So we know a lot of people want to collect information about themselves, but we felt that there was way too much information. We don't want to flood the glass screens. Since it's a smaller screen, we don't want to flood them with too much information. So we boiled down your motion and your performance during your workout into 3 simple metrics. That's your pace, how consistent your routines were, your intensity score, which is how explosive you were, and obviously that wouldn't work for like yoga, but for most workouts, even running or walking, you had to have an intensity score, and we're going to improve that over the course of the next few weeks and months. And then, of course, your overall endurance, and your endurance represented how complete your workout experience was, and eventually may talk to other Bluetooth LE capable devices to give you more information that we'll announce soon about your endurance, right?
Now, Noble, you brought up a great point, and I want to, again, raise it here in the context of challenges and opportunities. You had a challenge, and that challenge is glass is a very limited display. It's really great when it comes to monochrome stuff, but here you took that and you turned the idea from a limitation into an advantage. You present the information in a concise way, and in a way that's very understandable, and it really boils everything down to tell you how good was your workout.
Right.
And it essentially gives you a score and shows it to you graphically. And I think that's one of the lessons that I think every gamer needs to take away is you don't want to, when you show them the score, when you show them anything, you want to boil it down to the minimal, absolutely essential bits of information and show that on glass.
Right.
If you want to show them more, you've got other screens. You can show it to them on other screens later, but use glass to give them the absolute core essentials.
Right.
And these are the challenges that we have with glass, and I think that's a great lesson and a great takeaway about how to show output.
I think, honestly, though, I think we could go a little too far with that because, there is a game, one of the first games that was on glass was Spellista. And this is a game that's, it's not really meant for glass, right? If we take all of those rules and guidelines that you're talking about, this is an Android game that was put on glass, and it uses some gesture control with your head to make it glassware, but it's really right. It's really an Android game. So, but at the same time, I find myself playing it on glass quite frequently because if I am sitting down at home, it makes sense, and I'd rather look up and play rather than hold my phone and look down and play. So,
Steven, let me ask you something. Do you really play Spellista still?
I do, honestly.
Here's why. In an informal survey I did of about 15 people, you're now the 16th. You're the only one that still plays it. Now, that's informal, totally unscientific, but the impression I get is that people played it a couple of times because it was nifty, but they stopped playing it. And here's why, and these are, again, some lessons for us. The first is that the input, using head motion and steering around, that's actually in some ways not a great input. It works for very, very coarse inputs.
Yeah.
But it's not good for fine-grained ones, and we need to keep that in mind.
After getting the prescription frames, like you have as well, and I'm wearing glass 24 hours a day, which is really awkward to
people for a long time.
Right now. I don't know if Alan froze or is this cool, but I'll keep going. But after getting the prescription frames and wearing glass 24/7, I do find myself playing Spellista. I find myself doing a lot more with glass because I'm always wearing it. The reason why I'm not right now, I feel like I have to explain, is because I just went camping this past weekend and the foil finally bubbled up on me. It was a little bit too foggy and humid, and I have to replace my glass tomorrow. So I left it at home since the display is completely unusable. The foil completely peeled off the glass. But normally, with prescription frames, my prescription lenses in there, I'm wearing glass all the time. So if I'm sitting at home, I find myself on the couch, instead of firing up the Xbox or something, I do play Spellista. I played the mini games that Google has created. And those are also awkward, right? Playing tennis by doing this is awkward, but it's still a fun game.
My take on both Spellista and all of the mini games is they're good examples of
what not to do.
Well, they're good. Yes, they're good elements of certain programming things, but they are good elements of what not to do when you're writing a game.
Well, and this is
there's many situations for glass, right?
That's a valid point.
Right, if you're always wearing it, maybe sometimes you're gonna geek out in the corner and be swiping and moving your head around, and it's kind of fun still.
I know, but Steven, the reason why I piled on wasn't trying to troll those games or anything, but there's some constraints that glass, comes with, and as a developer, we just have to sort of remember that, and not to be critical with the Google Glass team. Like Alan said, from a developer standpoint, it's sort of opened, and I wish they would open source those games. But it sort of opened the door to what was possible. But the implementation, frankly, after playing any one of those games for one round, you noticed the device overheated.
Yeah.
You have to, building for glass, some of the unwritten rules that we have certainly encountered is that you have to respect that there's a limited battery time. So if you're wearing glass, especially when you're wearing glass all the time, like you said, a game has to respect those times. You'll notice those types of guidelines or constraints. You'll notice with LinksFit, the screen goes dim after a couple seconds, even as you're using it. And we're doing this back to what Alan is trying to, one of the points that Alan's been consistent with doing this, one of those lessons learned. We dim the screen and just take advantage of voice, right? We coach you through this thing. We assume that you've seen the video, the 30-second clip or less that showed you how to do an effective burpee or push-up or pull-up. Or downward dog, right? And so we trust that you're gonna continue with that routine, and we're listening for your motion. And if you're not doing that motion, we're coaching you. We're asking, "Are you okay? Continue," and so on and so forth. So, those examples with the tennis and the duck hunt games and the other Spellista, which I haven't really played much of. We can sort of look away from the intrusiveness of it or the awkwardness of it because it's just a new input, right? To me it's as equal as just looking down and playing on your phone, right? It's just as awkward as that, if you think about it. But you have to recognize as a small screen, it is socially not yet socially acceptable. So being you're sitting by yourself and sort of swatting at invisible things, you're going to be looked at.
Honestly, and I just want to add that what Noble and his team have done with LinksFit, although the implementation of that feature he just talked about, where you're in an immersive experience, so it's a native application that takes over and activates the projector on glass, and you're completely within the app. The fact that it actually goes to sleep, at least visually, is a really good object lesson for a lot of you watching this right now that you may want to emulate, because as far as Google's design patterns, it doesn't exactly follow them by the letter of the law, where it says, if you have a live card, you want to keep it running, or if you have an immersive experience, it's on basically for the duration of your application. But it's a really smart way to actually use the experience and say, okay, if you're in the middle of a workout and you've already seen the demonstration, like you just said, you don't need to have the thing running, as you do push-ups for 5 minutes, because it's going to kill your battery. Right. So,
the things I've liked the most about LinksFit, I really like that feature. It's definitely, so I think we could say there's like good glassware, but there's a lot of different types of glassware that don't necessarily have to be good glassware, right? Like following proper standards. Right. I agree that Spellista and the mini games don't necessarily follow best practices, but they're still fun. It's kind of like playing an Atari game on your Xbox. You don't, I still would, they were selling those games on Xbox, and you could play them.
Right.
But it's not really what the device is meant for. So.
Well, okay, and that brings me to what I think is the final point in this section, is that sure, you can come up with a game that's really, really cool, that looks really, really awesome, but is it fun to play on glass? And Stephen and I, you're obviously disagreeing with me about the sample games in Spellista being fun to play on glass. I'll respect your opinion, and I will agree there are probably some games that I would not find fun on glass, but would find fun in other contexts. But I think that's fundamentally what it boils down to, is when you're creating a game for glass, make sure that it's fun most of all. And one of the examples that I've got for this one is that we just saw Blippert. I got their name wrong, didn't I?
Blipper.
Blippler. just released is showing something where you've got these 3D meteors flying at you in glass, and you're tapping on the side of glass to shoot at them. And I'll admit, that looks really cool. I can see conceptually how that's a really cool idea for a game. I think it would be a terrible game on glass, though. And the reason I think it's a terrible game on glass is I think looking like this is just not a fun way to play a game.
But so let me ask you this then. There are a lot of these like games that are trying to be PlayStation 2, Xbox 360 type of games, mainly for movies, like the Iron Man game, the Spider-Man games, like these very like joystick style games that are on your Android phone. They're not really touch enabled. You have like a fake joystick on the left and a fake button on the right. Like, do you think that's an Android game?
It isn't, and let me jump in here. Those aren't, but you know, if you want to sort of port them over, maybe the thought, the whole idea here is that you have to sort of rethink the input, right? So in the sense of meteor, like you used meteors, perhaps there's no A/B button, right? Maybe there's a voice call where you basically instruct it unlimited lasers, if you get it, and it sort of shoots unlimited lasers. And if you want to use the head tilt gesture to sort of aim, that's what makes a game sort of you know, usable on this medium, right? Shovelwaring an Atari game on a touchscreen machine works a little better because the buttons are there and you can emulate them. The idea with wearables is that the buttons shouldn't be there at all.
Okay.
One other thing that's interesting to mention, since we were talking about Spellista and like that game as opposed to like other games, is if you are a game design shop and you're watching this right now, or if you're an entrepreneur and you just like have a good idea, it's like, hey, I want to build a game for glass, or if you're somebody who manages an existing brand. So go ahead.
First of all, contact us if you are, because we want to talk to you. But
yeah, get in touch with us. Yeah, so if you're one of those people and you're thinking about extending and you don't know a whole lot about glass or the development model, Steve and his team, when they wrote Glass Frogger, which is essentially a game that runs on a remote web server and then you play it through the Glass browser, and you can still, by way of the fact that you're using JavaScript, you can still access sensor data and you can track movement, and then you can actually control the player within the game. And it's a brilliant model, and I'm really surprised more companies haven't adopted that architecture. But his team actually threw that together, and they made a playable game that's got rich audio. It's basically a complete idea, and they threw that together in 44 hours. Contrast that with Spellista, which is a completely native game, and like we've already talked about, it's essentially an Android game. And the team that, when they rolled that out, they basically said, okay, well, in terms of the turnover time to put this whole project together, we're a game shop, and we do this kind of stuff all the time, and we're familiar with each other, and we're essentially our own company. Keep in mind, Steve's group was a bunch of people who got thrown together at the hackathon. Spellista's people, when they put that together, they're an existing shop, and it took them 4 months to build that. That's just kind of the disparity between Mirror API, Glassware, and GDK Glassware. If you're wondering about how long it'll take to put one of these games together.
Absolutely. Let me add to that a little bit about what happened that weekend of the hackathon. Basically, we came together as web developers who wanted to see what the Glass browser was capable of. We spent most of the time during that hackathon, probably at least 24 hours, just messing around with what sensors we could access and how we could utilize that data to actually be a controller. And then, like, the last few hours, we threw it together as Glass Frogger. And it was just like, take a bunch of images and put it onto the projects that we had already been building in terms of grabbing sensor data. We had some ideas about trying to integrate the touch panel, but it came down to time, so it's only using the accelerometer.
Which makes it a better experience, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, I don't know. So what would you think if Glass Frogger itself, right now you're jumping across the center of the screen. What if you could use the touch panel to move up and down the screen and actually jump with your accelerometer and move with your touchpad? What would you think of that?
I think that would be awkward, but that's just me.
Too much. It's basically too much.
Yeah,
I actually like the simplicity of it.
the
I'm with Noble.
simplicity,
I think the fact that it bases it all on one type of sensor input, it
Mhm.
it's it just makes it easy to grasp. I mean, kind of admittedly a little bit awkward to play in public.
Yeah.
Like if you're in confession in church, you probably don't want to play it, like while the priest is giving his Sunday sermon.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a playable game, and again, you guys cranked that out in less than 2 days' time.
Yeah. The mirror API is pretty awesome.
I should mention that our neighbors from the north, and there's some the CFC, I believe it's the Canadian Film Media Lab, the Canadia's Film Center Media Lab, I think they're called, and a Mind Pirate also built a bunch of games within the last several months. Now I know they launched a few games a few months ago. So if you guys are feeling very adventurous, definitely look for, I believe one was A to B. There was also a
Global Food War.
I'm sorry?
Global Food War.
Global Food War. That was an interesting concept using the sensors and the gyroscope in glass. That was a very good one. There's another one that I tried called State of Sin, which was actually an independent, and I'm sorry if I'm misrepresenting it, but look for State of Sin, Glassware, where it was actually an interactive movie that they ported that experience to glass. And so the entire experience was extending an independent film to a glass experience where you actually got to, continue investigating the world that you're just experiencing in the movie. And it also goes back to, my other note about corporations sort of thinking outside the proverbial box or whatever. So.
And Alan had a really good point because when we were talking about engineering fun, and we'll go to him because we're wrapping up right now. But keep in mind that glass or games, I should say, as a genre, as opposed to other types of software, where you're not necessarily reliant on this for as a business app might be, or like a news push service where you're just kind of you're expecting it to come in as part of your daily life. Games are really, really fun, and they can have incredible stickiness for a very short amount of time, and then someone either finishes the game and they get tired of it and stop playing it, or they just become bored with it because your input controls are lame, or like the graphics just weren't up to snuff, or whatever. So I mean that's a big challenge as far as design, is making sure that it is a fun experience, and that's a design mandate that's really different than a lot of other types of software.
So we're nearing the end of our time. I quickly wanted to touch on the fact we've talked about glass for most of this time. What do we think about other wearables? And we can range from anything like the Android Wear, or we can think about other wearables that may be coming down the pike along with it, broadly speaking. So what do we think? Where is the role of gaming for those, and what's the difference? Stephen?
I think that the Thalmic Labs Mio is a device that will revolutionize gaming. And I don't know if anyone here has seen their demo video. They put out even maybe over a year ago of connecting Mio with an Xbox, where you're basically able to act out the motions of a soldier in Call of Duty or something like that. You can use your arm and your hand as a gun. Like when you have gesture control on the level that the Mio provides, I think gaming is going to get to a whole other level. Whether it's wearable gaming or whether it's console gaming with wearable components, that's definitely going to take things to the next level.
I agree. I got to tell you, my favorite one in the out but not too far out is what the Cast AR people are doing. I mean, that's literally building holodeck technology. And if you haven't seen the demos of what they're doing, it's extremely cool and extremely realistic. Realistic is the wrong, and extremely something that can be delivered in the short term. What are your thoughts, Noble?
I think I can sort of answer that by imparting some wisdom. Don't shovelware. Don't port your app to a watch. Build for that medium. If it's a Mio by Thalmic Labs, build for that medium. All right, if it's glass, build for that. If it's a watch, build for that. I'm more excited these days for what Samsung is doing with their watches. I'm very excited about what Sony is doing with their upcoming suite of hardware. And of course, Sony's obviously is the Oculus Rift looking thing. Not to mention, I can't believe we've not mentioned Oculus Rifts yet, but obviously that lends itself to a truly immersive virtual reality that's been promised since the dawn of time.
Yeah.
And then finally, last but not least, is the old Android Wear, right? Because there's some possibilities, things that we haven't even thought of, and so it's going to be very, very interesting.
We've got two comments that were in the event that I want to share briefly. The first is from Jeff Bond. He says, Ancient Art of War, an old DOS-based game from Borderbund, might make an excellent glass game candidate. Turn-based games seem like there's a lot of potential, not too graphic intensive, yet not so boring like a straight port of a game like Zork. And Mia Pavlin had a great comment, or a great question and comment. Has anyone thought of exploring concepts of audio primary games with very, very limited visual interaction?
Right.
I think it's a less explored area and would be good in the context of giving continued feedback through audio. We are so used to thinking of games as video with audio optional, I would say audio secondary, that a reverse of that thought might be needed for a wearable like glass. What do you guys think?
I think that's what we strive to do a better job at with LinksFit, especially. I know it's not necessarily a game in a traditional sense, but it has a lot. We're planning on using a lot more audio feedback for you and audio cues as well, based on what you're doing and how you're moving, and so we sort of depend on, because when you're engaging in certain activities, the screen shouldn't be the only screen. But yeah, that's a very, very smart suggestion, and we're hoping to do the same.
So
that is a beautiful question by Mila. I'm wondering if at some point will we be able to programmatically have only some sort of audio in where we don't have to have like a card pushed or a screen of some sort, but you can still issue a notification, but it just not be a visual thing.
That might not be smart design from a usability or user experience standpoint. I want to know what is sending me that audio, right? If I initialized an app yesterday and it's still running in the background and creeping me out every now and again, that might not be the best experience. One way to get around that, Jason, is to sort of have a live card, right? It's normally sitting to the left of the time. You at least notify you that something. This is the thing that is, sending you those audio cues. So
and the timer application works exactly that way. Now that I think about it, you set a timer, and then when the timer has expired, and you actually have the time's up audio signal that goes off, but it never triggers anything visual. But point being, you have to actually start the service and have it running.
Right.
What do you feel then, Noble? What do you feel about the wearable? I guess it hasn't released yet, but there's a wearable called the Dash. It's basically just earbuds, but they're an app development platform, so they are going to have something like Glassware.
That would be, I love that idea. Actually, there are a few competitors in that space building, smart earbuds, essentially. And though I didn't contribute on their Indiegogo page, I'm very, very enthusiastic about voice being, if I could channel my CTO, Cecilia Beatty, voice is the new touch, right? And perhaps in a lot of cases when it comes to wearables. And so, to Mila's point, harnessing the power of audio needs to come back. We seem to forget the power of audio and what it does. and what it can do, right? So.
Okay, so we're out of time. First of all, I want to thank everyone who's been watching and those who have commented. This conversation is going to continue in the event, and I'm sure it's going to continue in many of our Google Plus posts and for many comments down the road. I want to remind people that this is the first of what we hope are going to be many conversations along these lines and a hangout on air. Next month, and we're going to aim them for the first Wednesday of every month. Next month, we're going to be recapping what happened at I/O. It looks like it's going to be a very design-heavy I/O, so we'll be talking about what comes out of the design discussions there. And finally, I'd like to ask if our guests have any final comments. Start with you, Stephen.
Well, so I guess my final comment will be that there are many different styles of gaming across multiple different platforms, and Glass and Wearables is a new platform, and even in that specific platform itself, I think there are many different types of games that can be created. We've talked about the audio only, we've talked about stuff that's maybe ported over from other platforms, and it may not be as perfect for it, but it still works. I think that it's just awesome to see that there's so many different types of things that can be done, and we shouldn't necessarily talk about one specific thing, but look at all of the different options that are capable.
Great point.
I agree with you completely. And we're early in this, so I think we're all still exploring. But I think what we wanted to do in this is help people shape it and think what they need to keep in mind. Any final thoughts, Noble?
Oh no, just build for Glass, build for a human. There are lots of amazing opportunities for truly new forms of games. Don't just sort of rehash an existing idea. You may get initial fanfare, but people won't use your app. Cue in Spellista, except for Stephen, of course. So that's pretty much it. Just build for Glass if you're building for Glass. Build for Mio if you're building for Mio. Build for Android Wear if you're building for Android Wear.
Okay. So again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. Jason, you got the final word.
Okay. My final parting shot would be, and I hope what we have been able to present here today for the edification of everybody watching, is that games are not just, everything does not have to be Call of Duty, and not everything has to be World of Warcraft. When you think of a game, what we've talked about today are games are real-life experiences, or games are board games, or games can be a series of thoughts over an extended amount of time. And games are fun. And I want to see a lot of creativity and a lot of interesting ideas expressed for Glass. I want to see all of the board games from my childhood, like Candyland, and yes, I played Candyland, and I want to see the Game of Life, and I want to see Operation, and things like that. And I would love for Parker Brothers to become a Glassware publisher and have their classic titles, expressed somehow over the Glass paradigm. I want to see the game space completely flourish, and then I can pick and choose things to do, when I've got a couple minutes to spare. And I can do micro interactions. So I'm really interested in seeing that, and I really want to see. We talked in this discussion a lot about turn-based games. I'd also like to see some innovation be done as far as real-time experiences and being able to use Glass, and I can participate in a game while my friends are in a web browser playing a game, and somebody else is on a console, and somebody else is on a PC through a common network socket, and hopefully with very, very low latency. I would love to see that kind of thing. Like if the World of Warcraft crowd is playing. Can I be informed of when a raid starts? So, the sky's the limit on this stuff, and I personally can't wait to see it, and I'm already working on a game. I'm working on a Tamagotchi client that I would really like to push out and get the community's feedback on. So, really excited about what's coming up.
So again, thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you again next month when we talk about design, a Think for Glass approach. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.